Don't just live for tomorrow, or just live in yesterday. Just be glad for all you have that's in today.
Hey everyone, Connie here, and welcome to my blind reaction to episode 9 of The Owl House. So, we're here with another episode, and hopefully it continues to be pretty darn good. Hopefully we continue to get the, really good stuff of this series, and less so of the more mediocre. Because the series, while good, isn't so far great, I would say. It has its definite positives, and it has a lot of great stuff in it, but the series as a whole hasn't really gotten to that level. Um, and it's still fairly early. This is only episode 9 of a first season, so it's not really surprising that it wouldn't have really hit its stride yet. Because right now, all we got, let's be honest, are basically slice of life episodes that don't amount to much, with a slightly touched on underlying story. Well, a couple slightly touched on underlying story elements, not even full stories, but story elements that touch on stuff like Ida's transformation, her curse, and everything. That touch on Amity and Luz's relationship, and so on. They're just like little bits of story here and there that carry on for multiple episodes. But overall, they aren't like this big thing. Because all in the end, unless somehow they make these like little things somehow really big and important, they're just little things. Like Ida's curse could be a bigger thing, obviously, but like the relationship between Luz and Amity, just it's like honestly, it was kind of obvious from the beginning that this was going where it was going to go, so it's not really like this big deal that it is going this way. Like it was super obvious that she was that kind of rival at the start. Well, at her introduction. It's just the kind of character that you've seen before. And I'm not saying it's done poorly here. It's just it's something that you've seen before, so you know what's going to happen. um, and then you have just so many other things here and there that are just completely like episodic stuff that doesn't really matter in the long run. It doesn't seem to carry over enough to really make it worth thinking much about. And that's a lot of these shows' problems, honestly. They go so hard into episodic stuff at first, while trying to bring in the story based elements later on, that it ends up either coming across as boring at first and just not really hooking a viewer in, or it comes across as just really sudden when a big story does start to be told. Like Steven Universe and Starverses were the same way. I honestly kind of prefer it when the shows have this big story right from the start, even if they do have episodic adventures and stuff during the first season and even further on. When there is actually a notable story from the start, something that hooks you in, something that really grabs your attention, I feel it does better overall. She-Ra has this example. She-Ra has an active, ongoing plot right from the beginning. Yes, there's a lot of episodes that are very episodic um and everything. It's just like, oh, this one thing for this week. What are we going to fight this time? What are we going to do this time? How's our relationships going to grow or even have trouble this time? Um, but even those episodes still somehow connect to the overall overarching plot of the series. And yeah, as the series goes along, it does get more serious with it, but the overarching storyline is there from the very beginning. And even MLP did this a little better. Of all shows, MLP is a very episodic show. Very episodic. But even season one had an ongoing storyline, believe it or not. And multiple seasons afterwards did as well. Season one had the ongoing storyline of the Grand Galloping Gala, and through multiple episodes, it continued to show the preparations for that. And so, even despite all the episodic, episodes that you had to sit through, you started to see that there was something starting to connect, that there was something being built up to. And that's especially why the big finale of season one was so impactful and still to this day, in my opinion at least, is one of the show's best season finales. Because it felt properly built up to, and there was all this setup throughout the season for it. Even if you didn't always notice. Um, like even the double rainbow, or not double rainbow, God, that's a fan project. The Sonic Rain Boom episode, even that was setting up for the finale, with Rainbow Dash meeting the Wonderbolts for the first time. So it's like, even MLP has done it more. And don't get me wrong, there might be a big moment by the end of the season where things come together in a very satisfying way. I fully acknowledge that. There might be. But right now, I don't really see it. Not as much, at least. Um, I see little tiny hints that there could be something there. Unlike with these other shows that have it super blatantly that there's an ongoing story, or the ones that are just like much more noteworthy with it. With this one, it's just not that, like, at all. um, and some people might say, like, oh, but the characters and the writing and the whimsicality of it all is what gets you through this. That you can kind of ignore the episodic nature because it's so well written. The characters are so well voice acted, and it's just so whimsical and magical and fun that it doesn't bother you as much. And I've always kind of disagreed with that point. Um, the idea that something can just be forgiven of what is, in my opinion, a downside by just claiming that everything else is better, it doesn't work. Everything else being good doesn't make the bad part disappear. It doesn't make the negative disappear. Yes, the voice acting is great. Of course. The animation is fantastic. The writing is good. Nothing spectacular as of yet, but good. And it's just, even with all of this stuff, and more even, that doesn't excuse the negative aspects of the series. If there is still that issue of it just not having hit its stride yet, that still exists whether the rest of the stuff is good or not. And that is kind of one of the reasons I dropped it the first time. And I'm not saying I'm going to drop it again right now, by the way, just making that clear. But that is one of the reasons I dropped it the first time. And it kind of ties in with the main one because it's focusing so heavily on these slice of life adventures, on these episodic episodes that it's ignoring the stuff that should be important plot threads that are covered more often. Like, I'm fine with it focusing a little bit every now and again on Amity and Luz's relationship. I'm fine with focusing every once in a while a little bit on Ida's curse. Like, that's okay. I have no issue with that. But you have some characters who just go episodes and episodes without being seen or even mentioned really much at all. You have plot points that take forever to get to that should be constantly touched on. Like even though I'm giving this series another chance, thanks to Smurflog's donation, it's just the issue with not addressing Luz's mother's reaction to everything and her finding out that Luz isn't at the camp. That's still an issue. And again, like I said when I started this up again, it's like I have heard that it is addressed. I don't know how, but I do know it is addressed. And don't tell me how, by the way. I'll wait till that actually happens. I don't even know exactly when it happens, and don't tell me that either. Even though it is, it's like the fact is, I do know it wasn't by episode 10. And that's still a notable problem. Because that is something that should have been brought back up, honestly, by episode 5. It's just, I'm just worried, honestly, that this is going to end up going in the same way as Steven Universe or Star Versus, to where it just starts off so episodic and then eventually gets its footing and gets its big story. But because of it, it tries to do too much and then ends up just fizzling out into this pathetic excuse for, well, this pathetic shadow, let's put it that way, this pathetic shadow of what it used to be. Both of those other shows, Star Versus and Steven Universe, started off as very episodic, became amazing with their story, and then just completely dropped the ball and were terrible in the end. Not just bad, terrible. And I'm afraid that Owl House will be one of those shows. It seems to be going in a very similar way. And it's wild because people have compared this to Gravity Falls, but in terms of the way it's being handled, no. Gravity Falls had an ongoing story from the start, even with its constantly episodic episodes. Again, I keep saying episodic episodes, it's just weird to say that. But even with all of that, it's like it still had ongoing story and mystery from the start. Everything was clearly going to be connecting from the start. It's like that had been doing things so much better. It's not even comparable. Just because Alex Hirsch is in this and may have helped out with this a little bit or whatever, that doesn't mean it's actually comparable to Gravity Falls in almost any way. There's some humor that's similar. I'll give it that. There is some similar humor. But in terms of how the series is being told and showcased and everything, no, it's not the same. But again, as I said, I am giving this another shot thanks to Smurflog's donation. And hopefully it just ends up continuing to be good, and hopefully once it does reach that point where it's really good and the story is really hitting its stride, it doesn't fall like Steven Universe and Star Versus did. Hopefully it doesn't completely drop the ball like those shows did. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. Um, because right now it's like that's all this show has. And I'll end with this because I've been talking in these pre-thoughts for a long time, but all this show has right now is potential. It's just good at the moment. It's not great. It's nothing special. Honestly, Star Versus at this point was better. She-Ra at this point was definitely better. Steven Universe, because the first season had like 50 something episodes, by episode 9, I don't think it was as good as this. I will admit that Steven Universe took a lot longer to really get going. Um, but yeah, the point is, it's just kind of good at this point, and I'm really, really hoping that once it does get to that point where it's probably going to be great, it stays there and doesn't just fuck itself over like those other shows did. Um, but like I said, we'll have to see. We'll have to see. Because this show has so much potential, and if it capitalizes on it, it could be amazing. But if it doesn't capitalize on it, or if it just completely destroys itself after capitalizing on it, then yeah, that's just going to be another unfortunate self destruction of a series. Um, but anyway, anyway, like I said, I had talked long enough in these pre thoughts. So we're just going to get started. So when the screen fades to black, pause this redirect and go to the description below. Follow the link to the reaction, and after you watch it, come back here to the redirect and resume play. Because after it fades to black, then it fades back in. Everything from that point forward will be my afterthoughts and will contain spoilers to the episode. Excuse me. So that being said, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you at the reaction. Okay, and we are back, and we'll begin with spoilers in 3, 2, 1, now. This is another episode like last one where it's like the plot here is honestly really overdone and just kind of generic as hell. Um, the entire concept, like, okay, Gus and I don't remember exactly what his name was, but the other kid were kind of having this rivalry over who should run the club. Um, Gus realizes that the other kid's lying, so he lies to try and get his way. Things go bad, but in the end, it all works out, I guess, for the better. It's like you've seen this kind of plot everywhere. It's another example of just a case where it's just super generic and kind of bland. Um, yeah, the specific, um, like, well, the specifics of it with the boiling aisles and having like the detention be so ridiculous and everything. Yeah, like, yeah, it makes it a little more fun to watch. But overall, it's just like, okay, so are you trying to just like tell these overused, like boring, generic ass stories with just a shiny coat of paint over them? Like they're not even doing anything special with the story, with the plots. Again, they're just the generic plots, just they make them look different with because of the Boiling Isles aesthetic and whatnot. That's really it. They don't do anything exciting or new or different with the actual plots at all. I guess the only thing you could say that was done here that was different than normal is that the jerk kid kind of won in the end. Like he didn't get as much of a punishment at all. But everything else was just by the numbers. And honestly, the B plot was more interesting. Seeing Ida cleaning up all of the things she did when she was going there, um, just trying to get Luz into the school and everything, and interacting with Principal Bump. It's just like that stuff was vastly more interesting than the actual A plot of this episode. I would have rather had the episode follow that. I would have rather had that be the A plot. That would have been like phenomenally more fun and interesting just to see all the kinds of wild creative things that Ida had done. Instead, they relegate it to like, oh, they're mentioned and you see kind of the results of Ida cleaning them up and stuff. And then at the end, you get to read a bunch of like little entries on what she did, basically three, I think. Which in the end, it's just like it feels like a B plot. It feels like they were just kind of pushing it to the side, and the story they wanted to tell was the A plot, which is really disappointing because again, the B plot was infinitely more interesting. The B plot here was just it had so much potential to be honestly, let's put it this way. If the B plot here were the A plot instead, and it were done to its fullest potential, this would be the best episode of the series so far, without question. For me at least. Um, but as it is, honestly, I'd say it's one of the weaker episodes of the series so far. Honestly, again, because the A plot is just not interesting. It's nothing new. We've seen it all before. And it's like, yeah, it's not bad, and you feel for Gus, and you understand, uh, like what's going on, and you want to see everything turn out well in the end. But again, it's like nothing new is done with it. It's just a retread. Luz isn't even at her best in this episode. She's just basically just going with the flow. I think a better way for this to have been done, once again, like just have the B plot be the A plot. And instead of just telling us about what she did, maybe have flashbacks to her actually doing them. That would have been great. Like have like Principal Mom or like have her like Principal Mom tell her, like, okay, now go clean out the ghosts from the girls' locker room. Like no specific context otherwise. So then she like grumbles and goes off to do it, but then it flashes back and shows you what happened. Like that would be cool. That would be a great idea. It would, and again, they could show so much more creative stuff. All those things that they showed in the end. Those little like those incident reports. Those could have been part of the episode, and they would have been great to see. Like I would have loved to see Ida feeding this griffin spicy snacks until it puked. That would be hilarious. But instead, they relegated that to just a little like reading bit at the end, and it's honestly just disappointing. Again, the episode wasn't bad. Like it wasn't unenjoyable or anything. It was just so generic and overdone that it didn't do anything for me as a viewer. It wasn't bad, it just wasn't great either. So there's not really much else to say regarding it because I mean, outside of the fact that Luz is now going to be going to the school, not much is I feel going to affect anything going forward. But let's talk about that last thing to kind of end this off. So Ida succeeded in the end in getting Luz into school, although it almost failed because Gus came clean about everything. Principal Bump did allow Luz to be enrolled. Um, so Luz is being enrolled in the school for the next semester. So technically, I guess not even right away, unless they just skip ahead to that with the next episode. Um, so this obviously means that Luz is going to start learning more about magic. There's going to be some different interactions, probably some more notable stuff with Amity. This is probably what I was, I guess you could say, waiting for in a way. Because I think that this is going to help focus the series a bit. As I was talking about in the pre-thoughts, the series felt like it was just a bunch of random stuff with no real sense of direction. it didn't really have that focused storyline like other shows have by this point. It didn't feel as much connected as other shows have with it, such as She-Ra or Star Versus at this point. So this is probably going to help with that. It's probably going to help bring forth a lot of, or bring together a lot of different story points we've already touched on, and build them up further, as well as introduce some new stuff. And it's going to have them all connected through the school, using that as kind of a medium to bring everything into one ongoing narrative in a way. Even if it doesn't go into a full blown like story arc or anything, I just feel like if they take advantage of this, as they should, it will be more focused. But the one downside to that is that that if they take advantage of this in the way that they should, it will mean less Ida and King, just by default. Because what they should do here is focus on Luz at the school, like her studies at the school, which means Ida and King would kind of take a back seat, maybe relegated to a B plot every couple episodes, not even every episode, because I feel like it would take away too much time from the school stuff, which at this point would be too important to just take away from. So yeah, it's just, that's what they should do. Do I think they're going to? Unfortunately, probably not. Unfortunately, probably not only because of Ida's popularity, but also because of, well, Ida and King's popularity, but also because they probably don't want to leave Ida and King like kind of off camera too much. They're probably going to have the school episodes and then just other various episodes sprinkled together randomly. So it's like you'll have maybe a school episode, and then it'll be a few episodes of other stuff before another school episode, something like that. And that would be very disappointing, because it would just feel like it's not taking advantage of the situation that it's built itself. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I don't know where this is going to go. Like I said when we brought this back, I do know one very big thing that is coming in the future. I just don't know the context behind it. And I only know about it because it was literally impossible to avoid when it happened, because it was literally everywhere online, on pretty much every website I went to. So, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube itself, like you would see thumbnails of it everywhere, even if you weren't looking for it or anything like it. So it's like, geez, it was everywhere. But we'll get to that when we actually get to that. Like I said, I don't know the specifics or the details of how it goes down, so I want to remain spoiler free, as spoiler free as I can. But yeah. I'm interested and cautious to see where this goes, because I'm afraid it's going to take the wrong direction with it. But at the same time, I'm hopeful that it'll do right. We'll just have to see. And I hope that if they do focus on the school at this point, that it's not just for a couple episodes and then they return back to normal. That would be a big mistake as well. But anyways, tell me in the comments below what you thought of this episode of The Owl House, and thank you so much for tuning in. For now, I'm Connie, and I'm signing off. See y'all next time.